Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophets Speak. Today we continue our study of Book 2 of Chronicles, Divrei Hayamim Bet. We are about to study together chapter 13. We ended chapter 12 with the death of Rechavam, the son of Shlomo, the son of David HaMelech, and how Rechavam catapulted the once united and mighty kingdom that existed under Shlomo and catapulted it into destruction and ruin, civil war, a split of the kingdom between the north and the south, and then was ravaged by an invasion of Shishak, the pharaoh of Egypt, barely saved the city of Jerusalem by giving up the wealth and the gold of the temple and the king's treasury. Then Rechavam passed on and handed over the reins of leadership to his son Aviyah, and we are about to read in chapter 13 of the reign of Aviyah. Now, I know that until this point, I've only done a comparison between the version of events as presented in the book of Chronicles with the version as presented in the book of Kings. I tried to focus more on, as we study Chronicles, what Chronicles is saying and what it's teaching, what Divrei Hayamim is teaching, and what it's teaching when we learn Malachim and when we studied Malachim together a while back. But, and I avoid trying to compare and contrast. However, when I study the story of Aviyah, I would like to delve a little deeper into this comparison and this contrast because we can learn a lot from it as to the purpose of the writing of this book, Divrei Hayamim, and the writing of the book of Melachim. So Melachim, if we look in chapter 15 of Melachim Aleph, Kings 1, we find the story of this king Aviyah. And the first thing we note is that Aviyah there in the book of Kings is not called Aviyah, he's called Aviyam with a mem. Now, this, of course, is not the only example of people who had the different parts of Tanakh and different parts of the Bible have slightly names that are slightly modified here and there. But this one is particularly telling. Aviyah, of course, means my father is God, right? Avi, my father is Yud K is God, right? Aviyam is at best takes God out of the picture. The Yud Mem has no godly meaning in Hebrew. So the Yud Mem, though, at worst, I mean, at best, it's simply removing God from his name, which is very telling, and you'll see why in a minute. But it's actually, I believe, more than that, because Yam in Hebrew means the sea, but it comes to mean the sea because way back in ancient times, an ancient Canaanite god of the sea was called Yam. So Aviyam is actually stating it would be a Canaanite name saying, my father is Yam, this idol, the god of the sea. So even if you don't buy what I just told you for whatever reason, you disagree with me, but at least you would have to admit that Aviyam takes God out of the picture from his name. Now, the fact that the book of Kings takes God out of his name is not surprising, because if we look at that story, it says that he ruled for 3 years. His mother was Ma'acha bat Avishalom. We'll talk a little bit more about the mother issue. But Vayelech, and he went in all of the sins of his father. I'm just reading quickly from chapter 15 in Kings. And his heart was not whole with God, and not nearly like his ancestor David. However, it's only in Kilaman David, only because of the merit of his ancestor David, God gave him a near Yerushalayim, a lamp in Jerusalem, in order to establish his descendant after him and keep him as king. So basically, it's saying Aviyam, right, in the book of Kings, is portraying him as not a good person and not a good king, but God just kind of tolerated him simply because he was David's descendant and he wanted to maintain the house of David. And because David did proper, and then it mentions a little bit about the war between Rechavam and Yeravam, which, in other words, the war between the North and the South, which existed throughout the career of Aviyam. We'll read about that more detail soon. And if you want to know more about Aviyam, go ahead and read the history books. And then he passed away. That's the version as it stands in Kings. So basically, Kings makes it clear that Aviyam, with a mem at the end, was not a good guy. It says absolutely nothing positive about him. Simply the only saving grace, so to speak, is the fact that he just so happens to be a descendant of David, so God kind of tolerated him. And that's it. Now we're going to have more details in chapter 13 in the book of Chronicles. Now remember, in the book of Chronicles, um, the being written in the beginning of the Second Temple period, as we've mentioned many times, the chronicler, the writer of the Divrei Hayamim, is encouraging the people to reestablish the house of David. And in every case so far, we saw this in the story of as it was recounted, the story of David, where the David's sins and David's mistakes and the rebellions against David's reign were not mentioned in the book of Chronicles. David was portrayed only his good parts, not his bad parts. And we saw the same thing with Shlomo. Shlomo's descent at the end of his career, the errors and mistakes that he made, were also not emphasized in Divrei Hayamim. In a similar way, we will find, and Rechavam was portrayed also not very well, although there were some slightly more positive things about Rechavam here in chapter 12, in the beginning of chapter 12, showing that, that when push came to shove, when he was in duress, he and his people were willing to submit themselves to the will of God. So even though Rechavam in the book of Chronicles wasn't exactly portrayed as a great guy, but it did show a little bit more of a positive spin than we saw in the book of Kings. But here in the story of Aviyah is similar in that respect. First of all, instead of calling him Aviyam, which is a name which explicitly relates to Avodah Zarah, relates to idol worship, he calls him Aviyah, which is a very beautiful name, a name saying that my father is God. So here we go. During the 18th year of the reign of Yiravam, and as is my habit, I do not generally delve into chronology. There's lots of chronological problems. If you add this one's years and those one's years, you don't exactly get to this amount of years. But just take it at its face value for now. So this is talking about, and we see this in the Book of Kings too, whereas it tells us the year of the ascent of the king of Judah, according to what year it was during the reign of the concurrent king in Israel. And we see the same thing. It'll tell us the king of Israel became king in such and such year when so and so was the king of Judah. So back and forth, just to kind of give us a parallel, to show us the two kingdoms developing and moving along through history in parallel. So during the 18th year of Jeroboam, who was the king of the northern kingdom, Vayimloch Aviyah al Yehuda, Aviyah was then coronated as king over Yehuda, over the nation of Judah, the southern kingdom. Shalosh shanim malach b'Yerushalayim, he ruled for 3 years. B'shem imo, and his mother's name was Michayahu bat Uriel min Giva. Now, this is a problem because we just read in the book of Kings that his mother's name was Ma'acha. Is Ma'acha the same as Michayahu, and was the daughter of Uriel? How does that work? I'm not going to delve into that here, but I just wanted to point it out. There's many ways to try to understand it. And there was a war between Aviyah and Yeravam and Jeroboam. So we have here in Kings that was mentioned listed as the war between Rechavam and Yeravam, because it was the war that was started in the time of Rechavam. So the enmity between the two nations will always, throughout history, be in some sense an echo of the original war between the two original kings and during the times of which the war started. Vayesor Aviyah. Now here we have some details about this story, details which will make Aviyah sound a little bit better than he was presented in the book of Melachim. First of all, we did not mention here how Aviyah was a really bad guy, how he worshipped idols, how he did not follow in the footsteps of his forefather David, and so on and so forth. All that's not here. We just mentioned how he fights the war. And if you recall, in the book of Melachim, it emphasized that Aviyah's only saving grace was that he was continuing the line of Davidic kings. His ancestry, which is not much of a saving grace, but it's the only reason why God kind of tolerated him, was the message that we got there. So Vayasar Aviyah Tamilchama B'chayel Gibor Milchama. So Aviyah attached himself or joined himself to the battle along with the army of all of the soldiers, the Arba Meot Elef Ish Bachor, 400,000 chosen men. V'Yeravam Arachim Ol Milchama, and Yeravam set out against him in war, Bishmona Meot Elef, with 800,000 Ish Bachor Gibor Chayil, also chosen soldiers, powerful men. Vayakom Aviyah me'al lahar Tzimorayim, and Aviyah stood on top of Mount Tzimorayim, Asher Bihar Ephraim, which is in the territory of Ephraim. So here you have Aviyah had accomplished an incursion into enemy territory and took over this mountain, because Ephraim, of course, is in the northern kingdom, in the kingdom of Yeravam. Vayomer Shimoni Yeravam v'chol Yisrael, and he said, "Listen to me, Jeroboam, Yeravam, and all of Israel." Here, referring to, he's giving a message to everyone, but primarily to the members of the northern kingdom, which was called Yisrael, Israel, in contrast to Judah. Halolachem ladas, you should know, ki Adonai Elohei Yisrael nasan mamlachol David al Yisrael yolam, because God, the Lord of Israel, gave the kingship to David, right? So to be forever, to be the house and that leads the people of Israel forever. Ulevanov bris melach, and to his descendants, of course, Aviyah saying me, bris melach, a covenant of salt. A bris melach, salt. Remember, salt was used and still is used as a preservative that makes things last forever. A bris melach means a bris that's meant not to be ever broken. So here you have Aviyah himself emphasizing and bringing attention to the fact that I'm here and my legitimacy comes because of who I descend from. Aviyah did not say, come to worship God because that's the right thing to do. Come to worship God because that's the moral and ethical and just thing to do. Come and nothing. He just said, come because I am me. I am a descendant of David, which is kind of a similar impression that we had to Melachim. However, here it's presented as a positive thing, right? Aviyah, it doesn't exactly make him sound like he's a great saint of any sort, but it does make him sound somewhat better than it made him sound there, which serves the purposes, and this is the main point I'm driving at, of the writer of the Chronicles to establish in the hearts and minds of the people who are trying to rebuild the temple the importance and the eternity of the house of David, which will hopefully be reestablished as they build the second temple. Unfortunately, it wasn't, but we still hope one day for it to be reestablished in the future. Vayakam Yeravam ben Nevat, this is verse 6. So Yeravam ben Nevat, who was Eved Shlomo, who was the servant of Shlomo ben David, he had gotten up, so this is still his speech. Vayimrod al Adonav, right? And he rebelled against his master. So Yeravam, Jeroboam, who's your king, he was a servant to my grandfather, Shlomo. He rebelled. Vayikavtzu alav anashim rekim b'nei Belial, and he gathered around him empty men, people, nobodies, rough people, Vayit'amtzu al Rechavam ben Shlomo, and they rebelled and strengthened and became strong against Rechavam, the son of Shlomo, in other words, my father. At the time, Rechavam was inexperienced. He was childish. He had no courage. He's saying this about his father and explaining why Rechavam wasn't able to stand up. We know why Rechavam didn't stand up. It wasn't because he was a Na'ar V'rach Levav. We just studied in the chapter before. It was because he was told by the prophet not to bring about a civil war. So here we have Aviyah making it out as if I'm the strong man. I'm more powerful than my father. My father was a weakling. And because Yeravam was surrounded by a bunch of big shots, he was able to overcome him. And now you guys are saying, you guys are trying to and attempting to strengthen yourselves and rebel against the kingdom of God, Biad B'nai David, which is being led by the capable hands of the descendants of David. In other words, me, right? V'atem hamon rav, and you are this great, because you think you're such a great number of people. V'machem eglei zav, and you have these golden calves. Remember, by this time, you have we know this from the book of Kings. We haven't mentioned it in Divrei Hamim yet, but Yeravam had by now set up an alternate place of worship, because he, see a place where with golden calves to worship. Yeravam had already totally taken the people way off in the wrong direction. The first few years of Yeravam's reign, there was still hope that he would be some sort of an allied king or a vassal king to Judah, and the people would still worship together, and the people would still remain in some semblance of unity. But that's not what happened. Yeravam broke away religiously, broke away politically. Asher asa lachem Yeravam leElohim, that Yeravam created as if they were a god, and that's God with a small g for you to pray to, these calves. Halo hidachtem et kohanei Adonai, and worse, you threw out the priests of God that were actually there. Remember, we mentioned in the last chapter that the Kohanim and Leviim, the priests and the Levites, had to run from the northern kingdom southward into the kingdom of Judah in order to escape, because they were displaced and persecuted. At Bnei Aaron v'Halavim, those who were descendants of Aaron and the Levites, v'tasu lachem kohanim kamei aratzos, and you made for yourself kohanim, priests, just like all the other nations. And how do you become your priests? Kol habol l'malei yado b'far ben bakar ve'elim shiva, whoever comes to accept upon himself the mantle of priesthood by paying off the king with a cow and a couple of rams. Yeah, basically, you pay your way into the priesthood. You have to understand, when we look back today and we think of the priestly caste, we wonder, why would a birth give you the right to become the priest, right? But we have to understand that one of the reasons was in order to prevent corruption. Of course, it can also be a source of corruption. We understand that. But if at best the process should be, one would imagine at least, a process by which the people that are most deserving. But of course, what ends up happening is people pay their way into office. Powerful people get power because they have money, and this was the same thing back then, and it's the same thing today. And I don't think it'll ever change. Maybe when future times, hopefully, we'll come to our senses. But in the meantime, this is Aviyah speaking to them and saying, now anyone who wants to be a Kohen can be a Kohen. And then this person, by paying his way in, will then become a priest to something that isn't even a god, right? So this is what you guys have set up, right? However, us, we in the kingdom of Judah, Adonai Eloheinu, God is our Lord, right? We have not abandoned him. And the priests that serve in the house of God are the descendants of Aaron, v'halavim, v'meloches, and the Levites are also doing their work just like they're supposed to. Umaktirim ladonai olot baboker b'erev b'erev, and they bring the sacrifices, the burnt offerings, every morning and every evening, u'ketor samim, and the incense, u'marachet lechem, and the showbread, all as they're supposed to, al shulchan tahor, on the pure and holy table, the munarat hazahav, and the candelabra of gold, v'nerutea, and its lights, liva'er ba'erev ba'erev, to burn every evening. Kishomrim anachnu, because we are keeping it, mishmeret Adonai Eloheinu atem azatem oto. We are keeping the that which God had asked us to keep. You are the ones who have abandoned him. You have left him. So this is his speech. We are still being loyal. Still a little more to this speech. And right here in front of our army, right? We're not just here as an army to fight, but we are here representing the true God, is what Aviyah is saying. In front of us is Elohim, is God, right? right? Not that they had actually, one might think they may have had the Aron, the Ark of the Covenant, although some believe that the Ark may have been stolen by Shishak, the Pharaoh, in the generation before. But according to our tradition, it wasn't the Ark wasn't hidden away until later in Josiah. We'll get there in a while, but regardless, he's saying God is with us, right? Figuratively, v'chohanav and his kohanim, his priests, v'chatzosros hatrua, and the trumpets, which are meant to blow trumpeting sounds, la'ariah alechem, to blow these sounds upon you and towards you. Bnei Yisrael, al tilachamu em Adonai le'avosechem pilot tatzlichu. Children of Israel, do not wage war against God, the Lord of your forefathers. You will not be successful. However, the people did not listen to his speech. This was the end of the speech of Aviyah, declaring what makes him the rightful king, because he remains faithful to God, right? So this is portraying Aviyah in a much more positive light than he was portrayed in the Book of Kings. Still not making him out into a great saint or a wonderful person in any way. And he's also waging a war which Shemaiah, the Navi, the prophet in his father's day, said, "Do not wage." So whether or not Aviyah had some other prophet, tell him to wage this war, it's not clear from the verses. If there was a real prophet of God that told him, it would probably be recorded. It may have been a false prophet, or maybe he decided to do it on his own. But what happens is the prophet was only able to fend off and prevent civil war for a certain period of time. But by this time, that is gone. And now enmity, hatred, fighting, killing is what results. And as we know from most fights, that's what usually results. Not peace, but more fights and more war. So how did this go? Yeravam Hesevet Marav. Yeravam, he turned the ambush, Lavo Me'achareim, to come around the mountain, while he's giving this grand speech from the top of the mountain. Yeravam, instead of sitting there and saying, "Oh, okay, we won't fight," he was sneaking around the back. Vayu Lefnei Yehuda, and they so the main body was sitting there listening to Aviyah's speech, but while he's doing that, Yeravam was leading an ambush party around the back. So now the Aviyah's speech led to the people of Judah being surrounded from all sides. Vayifnu Yehuda, and Yehuda then turned and said, "Uh-oh, now we are being attacked from both sides." They cried out to God, and this caused them to cry to God and pray. And the Kohanim were blowing on the trumpets, and this enlivened and woke up right here and screamed. So this Yariu is they raised a loud cry of battle. The people of Judah, and at this time when the people of Judah, instead of falling and scattering in fright and fear, they emboldened themselves, knowing and feeling that they had the just cause of God behind them. They managed to win the war, and God chased Jeroboam before Aviyah and Yehuda. Even though they were surrounded, they managed to make it out of the war and win. And they ran and retreated and fled from the people of Israel, the northern nation, in contrast from the people of Judah, the southern nation, and God gave them in their hands as enemies. And Aviyah and his army struck them with a great victory. 500,000 soldiers were slaughtered on the side of the Israelites on that day. At that time, the people of Israel in the northern kingdom were subdued. And this strengthened the kingdom of Judah. Why? Because they were loyal and they relied on God. And this is a message that's going to continue throughout Chronicles. Because they remained loyal to God, that's how the book of Chronicles understands that they won this battle. And Aviyah pursued and ran after Jeroboam. Vayilkod mimenu arim, and he captured cities. He captured at Beitel, Viet Benosea. That's one of the cities in which the temple with the calf was. Viet Yishana, Viet Benosea, Viet Ephraim. That's Ephraim with a nun at the end and an ayin at the front, not Ephraim as in the tribe of Ephraim and its surrounding cities. During the time of Aviyahu, the strength of Yeravam was subdued and weakened. It never became re-strengthened. Eventually, Yeravam died in a state of weakness where his kingdom was weak. Aviyahu was strengthened in his kingdom, and he married 14 wives. And he had 22 sons and 16 daughters. If you want to know more about the story of Aviyah and what he did and the things that happened, they are all written down in the story which is recorded by the prophet Edo. There were two prophets active at this time, Edo and Shemaiah. We heard from Shemaiah here. Edo we hear about in the book of Kings a whole bunch. So those were the prophets at the time. You can read about it. One gets the sense, and a lot of people mention this. One gets the sense as we study the book of Chronicles that the chronicler had access to many of these books that he keeps quoting here. If only we had access to these today, you can only imagine what we would learn from them. But unfortunately, they are not extant, or if they are extant, we have no idea where they are. Vayishkav Aviyah im avotav, and Aviyah then laid with his fathers, which of course, as we've seen, is the euphemism for he passed on. Vayikbru also Bir David, and they buried him in the city of David, which has now already become the place where the kings of David are being buried. Vayimloch Asa beno, and his son Asa became king in his stead, Tachtav. Biyamav Shakta Haaretz Eser Shanim. And in the days of Asa, the land was quiet. There was no more war. The enemy from the north was subdued, and there was quiet and peace. We'll read about the reign of Asa, which is a reversal of the path away from God that Aviyah had taken. But we'll study that in the next chapter 14 when we study together. We have here studied chapter 13 together. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. Looking forward to studying the rest of this wonderful book. Have a wonderful day.